Hi, everybody. This is Jeff from Four Muddy Paws coming to you this evening. This is another edition of our kind of In the Kitchen series. This is a special edition. We are talking over the next couple of weeks with lots of our brand partners all about fresh foods and particularly our raw foods. And we're calling this Destination Fresh Foods and how we boost the bowl. So we're going to take a journey over the next couple of weeks. And we have a whole series of talks that we're going to have. There's about 8 in total, and then we'll be having more on our Facebook page and social media and things, more tips and tricks and things that you can learn all about feeding new fresh foods. But tonight, this is sort of our keynote of the entire 2-week adventure that we're going to have in fresh foods. And we have Billy Hoekman tonight from Answers Pet Food. And Billy is the nutrition science director for Answers and truly a wealth of nutrition knowledge. And we are very, very excited that he was able to take his time out of his schedule. He speaks all over the country with lots of people every day, every week. And we're really happy that Billy was able to be with us this evening to talk to the Four Muddy Paws customers and our clients and anyone else who's listening about our health. Because as you know, we're very passionate about the health and well-being of our dogs and cats. And we think that, the foundation of health and well-being is nutrition, and that best nutrition comes from fresh, whole food. So Billy is going to start us off. So Billy, do you want to just give us a little bit of idea and introduce yourself and a little idea of your background and how you got started in animal health and animal nutrition?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And so I am the nutrition science director for Answers Pet Food. And so just to give an idea of people, sort of, if they have never seen me before or something, what I do with the company, we are a very small company based out of Pennsylvania. So we all kind of engage in a lot of different things as happens, as you probably know, working in a small company. Yeah. So I do, R&D, product development, that kind of stuff. I do all of our education programs. I run our vet program, and, down to, little things here and there. And that it's a very family centric business. I'm actually, weirdly enough, I'm like the only non-family member that's worked for the company for a very long time, but you sort of get adopted into that family.
Right.
So I came to Answers Pet Food much like, anyone who's watching this. You just have a sort of want to feed your animal the best. I have a dog. It's my first dog, and she's 14. And when I got her, I said, what do I feed this dog? And that question never became uninteresting to me. And I, have a very sort of, singular focused sort of brain, right? If I like something, I want to know everything about that specific thing. And so, I consider myself to have climbed the ladder like, almost anyone watching this. So I'm 100% self-taught person who worked my way up in the company, to the position I am now. And, I'm very proud of the fact that I am proof that anyone who wants the information and anyone who wants the science can learn it, and it's there for you, and you can be confident in that. And so I've been with the company about 10 years, and again, it's I haven't always been the nutrition science director, but I get to work my dream job every single day, and so I feel pretty lucky.
That's great. Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different things, but one of the big topics is just talking about the transformational power of fresh foods. And because we just believe fresh is, anything that can come right from the earth, right from the ground and grown in a natural process is always going to have the power of good nutrition. And so what are some of the nutrients found in fresh foods, and why are those fresh foods better, in your mind, when we're feeding that to our pets?
Well, the reason why, you can look at almost virtually any study that compares, let's say, food coming from an actual food source, like a whole food source, versus food like an isolated nutrient. And the problem with nutrition is, and we work with this every day, and we try to sort of educate in the opposite direction, is that it's like a reductionist practice. People try to reduce it down to what are the specific nutrients. Here's the, 50, 25, 12, whatever the number is, nutrients that my dog needs. in order to thrive. But the problem is we just don't understand enough about nutrition to make, claims like that. So when you look at, for instance, food comparative to isolated nutrition, you could say, oh, if you eat a carrot, you're going to get beta carotene. So carrots are beta carotene, but they're not. They're hundreds and thousands of different phytochemicals, and all those phytochemicals interact with each other. And so when you look at that, when you take that question, the problem is that when we process food as opposed to using fresh food, what we're doing there is we are processing it so much that we have to add nutrients back. And we're adding nutrients back to something, and we don't truly understand it all. We don't understand exactly how it works. And so for my money, I like to keep the food as in its natural state as possible. And in our case, with fermentation, even help out, by adding more bacteria into that food. But, we revert to what we don't know. We don't want to imply that we do know it and then insert, random nutrients. We want to keep everything as whole as possible.
Right. Great. And I think that sort of touches on the feed versus food, because so much of what our animals are eating is actually feed grade as opposed to whole fresh food grade. So I think you kind of touched on that, and that the nutrients in whole fresh food are multiplied versus a feed, which is only part of and something that's been highly processed.
Well, and with feed, you just truly don't know what you're getting. So one of the other parts of my job that is very interesting in one sense and very boring in another sense is going to AFCO meetings. And so AFCO, for those of you who don't know who are watching this, is an association of feed control officials, which essentially has no regulatory power, but does have regulatory power because the states actually give them that regulatory power. And it's a very interesting thing to be, to a part of, because it's actually been around for about 100 years. And the whole goal was to get, standards across the whole country, which has not been achieved yet. And we're going on 100 years here. So I wouldn't consider that necessarily a success. But so I was talking to someone recently who was, so when you look at feed or food quality or whatever's in your pet food, because all companies that are sold nationwide have to deal with this, because if you didn't go by AFCO regulations, you wouldn't be able to be sold in a lot of the states. And so I was talking to someone recently, and they were saying, I ordered the OP, which is the official publication, which actually defines every pet ingredient that can be in food. Now, keep in mind, you have to pay $175 for this, which is ridiculous, to know what's in your pet's food. And every year it changes, so you have to keep doing that. And this person actually reached out to AFCO and said, hey, I got your book, but I still don't understand what some of these ingredients are. Can you help me? And they said, well, we can't help you, but you could pay an AFCO consultant to help you interpret the book. So now you have to also pay a consultant to figure out what's in your food, which I think is ridiculous. So with the feed grade stuff, the problem is you don't know what you're getting. Are you getting, let's say it's oats. Are you getting oats? Or are you getting the byproduct of oats after it's been used for something else? What a lot of people think they're getting and what the bag shows on the outside is not really true. And, if anyone wants to learn just how weird and sort of not great it is for the consumer, anyone can go to AFCO meetings. Unfortunately, you just have to pay $500 to get in. So most people don't.
Right. And so if anyone's confused with what's in your pet's food, what your pet is actually eating, you're not alone. Many people are confused, and you don't know. And that's why trying to move to adding more fresh foods in, I think, can make a big difference in your pet's health. So there's kind of three categories. I think when you're talking about like our tiers of processed foods, we have our non-shelf stable foods, right? So those are like our homemade diets, our commercial raw diets, or gently cooked diets. And then we have dormant fresh, which are freeze-dried and our dehydrated foods. And then we have our those processed foods, which might be baked or extruded kibble, or canned foods, things like that. So what are just quickly sort of talk about like those three categories. So the non-shelf stable, those dormant fresh, and then the processed food. and sort of what
Yeah,
happened.
I've never actually heard someone describe it as dormant fresh. It's a very interesting terminology. So, yeah, I mean,
Actually,
there's
just for point of reference, I got that from Dr. Becker. So she had mentioned that in a talk, and that's how she referred to them. I thought that was kind of unique. So I'm just passing along that thought process.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah,
If that was the one you mentioned in the email, I didn't
yeah,
remember that. But yeah,
yeah.
that's super interesting. So I mean, basically, the more you process food, in terms of with heat or other types of processing, the more you're going to get. And by processing, I mean, any stage of not only processing the food, but also storing the food. You're going to get, degradation of the nutrients. You're going to get changing. You're going to get substances that are added to the food with high heat producing. So there is a reason why, virtually every highly processed food like kibble you'll see has a vitamin pack in it. It's because everything in it has been processed so much. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people look at, for instance, processed food and they say, oh, well, meat, chicken meal is better than chicken because technically it has the moisture removed, so it's higher in protein. Well, that is true that it has less moisture, but it's also true that it's not just chicken with the moisture removed. It's chicken that's been cooked into a powder. So you can imagine when you cook something down into a powder that's meat, you are actually changing the chemical nature of that very thing. And so, I think most people feed that type of food just because that's what's been going on for the past 100 years. But the problem is the numbers are not in our dog's favor, right? Lifespans are not going up, right? Chronic disease is going way up. I mean, I saw a statistic that less than 1 in 2 dogs now get cancer in their lifetime, which is insane. And so, all these, I specifically, we write diets for all sorts of conditions, and we're starting to see, and a lot of the veterinarians I talk to that are in our program are starting to see these disease conditions much sooner. And so, I think, and you're going to find out that like every question you ask me is like a 40-minute answer. So, so, so we obviously something needed to change, and the reason why raw food and other types of food are so powerful and so successful is because they're working. If they didn't work or people didn't see a change in their animal, they wouldn't be marketable because they're more expensive. And so it's very interesting to me because as time's gone on, the only reason the pet food industry at large, the existing pet food industry before there was this fresh food movement, has gotten better is because of people. So if you go to a grocery store right now, the food's a lot better than it was 10 years ago, right? And so that's people that did that. That companies weren't like, oh, we're doing this cutting edge animal research and we figured out, X, Y, and Z that chicken needs to be the first ingredient or whatever it might be. So you have your processed foods, and there are different levels of processed, foods in terms of kibble and the ingredient quality, et cetera. And then you have freeze dried and dehydrated foods, which are going to be less. So they're less processed, but you're still processing them to the point where you are going to get some degradation, especially when you're talking about freeze drying liquids. That's not an easy process. So any powdered liquid, you're getting sort of out of the raw category and into something, a little bit different there. But freeze drying is an interesting one. So if I had a scale, it would go, processed food being the least bioavailable, then dehydrated because you are, it is at less of a temperature, but you're doing it for longer periods of time to get it, to where it needs to be. And then with freeze drying, you do lock in more of the nutrients. It's not going to be what we're going to talk about in a second, which would be frozen, just regular frozen food. But with freeze drying, one of the drawbacks is you do see damage to the outside of bacteria. So freeze drying is going to be more bioavailable than a lot more bioavailable than, for instance, kibble. But I still, in my book, I still don't put that in the raw category because there's a huge difference between innate moisture in food, the moisture that is innate in it. So like milk versus powdered milk or something like that, and adding water back to it. Those are two different things. One of the reasons we don't do any foods like that is because you're also putting the onus on the consumer to actually be able to rehydrate it. Because we can also look at studies that show animals that eat food that has moisture retain more moisture than animals that eat dry food and drink water. So I know that people might think, well, they could just drink water, but we know through studies that is not actually true necessarily. So then you get into and keep in mind with that too, that water is incredibly important. It's the delivery system of every nutrient, and it is the nutrient you need the most of, right? It's the substance that you actually need the most of. And so it's a huge problem for your dog or cat to continually eat food that doesn't have its innate moisture, that's not hydrated. So obviously, if you're feeding any of those foods, I highly recommend adding more frozen food that hasn't been processed. Then you get into raw food, which is the concept of just feeding whole actual foods, and sort of incorporating all of those things I was talking about, all of those, not only vitamins, but enzymes and cofactors, all of those things that just help your body or your dog or cat's body to be able to assimilate all of those nutrients. And then we do something a little bit different, which is also raw, but is fermented raw food, which is sort of the pre-digestion of those foods by bacteria. And it makes it sort of healthier in that they're pre-metabolized. And obviously you're getting more probiotics as well.
Right. Great. That really helps. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit about fresh food literacy. And what I really mean by that is understanding the nutrition behind fresh food and understanding some of the concepts behind why you want to add more fresh food to your pet's diet. And that's dogs or cats, especially cats, with that. So basically, you kind of touched on it, but what should we look for when we're feeding our pets? What's a general, just an umbrella, and we'll dive deeper into it later, but like in a general umbrella, what should we look for?
Like if you're picking out a food?
Yeah, in general. I mean, what are some of the qualities, standards, or something? If I'm going to walk in, or I want to or look at my dog's diet or my cat's diet, what are some general umbrella terms we can?
Well, I mean, the first thing you want to look for is mostly animal products. So, dogs are carnivores and cats are obligate carnivores, which, by the way, because I get questions on this, doesn't mean dogs only eat meat. So because you're a carnivore does not specifically classify you as only a meat eater. So it's not herbivores only eat plants, carnivores only eat meat, and and omnivores are somewhere in the middle. So I mean, there's been certain wolf populations that have been studied that, for instance, eat large amounts of blueberries during certain seasons because there's a lot of them available. What we know about wolves is anatomically they do best on eating animals because those vitamins are already preformed. Those are efficient foods, but they'll also eat other ones. So, plants and things like that, or they get the stomach contents or whatever it might be. So the first thing you want to look for is mostly those animal products. So be it muscle, be it organ meat, be it, dairy, be it eggs, all these things that are already made nutrition that are going to be much more efficient for your dog or cat to. And the other thing I would look for too is if a company is doing the right thing, they're going to brag about it. So there's not necessarily, some company out there doing amazing things. If you take us, for example, our whole thing is transparency and making the best possible thing. And that's really all there is to it. And so we're going to tell you, here's how we do the best thing. And so you want to look for people who are going above and beyond the regular terms. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and buy your chicken. Every chicken you see at the grocery store is going to say antibiotic and hormone free. You want to look for beyond that, right? You want to look for, is it organic? Is it pasture raised? Same thing in pet food. You want them to be able to sort of, verify that too. And I think the other part too is just generally, shopping at a local retailer like yourself is very, very important because you're sort of vetting all the foods that come into your store before they're there. And most people don't want to do that, right? We love pets. we love pet food, right? We're huge nerds, but that doesn't mean the average person wants to sit there and think about it all the time,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's going to be very important. And I'm not saying that to suck up to you, I promise. But
No. It's true though. That's why we started our store, because we found our dog Salem on a camping trip, and then we didn't have a place to go really to find good quality food. So we're like, why don't we just build something for him? And so that's how our store came to be, because we couldn't find what we wanted or needed for our own dog. And so with lots of research, and 16 years later, here we are. But that's what we love, absolutely love what we do, and love helping other people and their pets. So what's a dog or cat's preferred source of calories, particularly when it comes to looking at protein, fat, carbohydrates, those kinds of, where do they want to get their, generally speaking, where do they want to get their calories from?
So both species, they don't generally want to get their calories from carbohydrates. And we know this because we can look at studies where they actually pick their own diets. And those studies are actually pretty eye-opening, because when you compare wolves to domestic dogs, they're actually much higher in fat than people would actually think. So they're actually somewhere up of picking about 60% of their calories from fat. Now, a lot of people think fat is filler or fat is bad, and that could not be further from the truth. Fat is as important as protein, right? And for the general function of the body. And so, for instance, when we formulate our food is a 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio. So you're using healthy fats for what they're supposed to be healthy. And I think that term even gets skewed. I don't mean healthy fats. I don't mean what you probably hear about a lot wrongly in human nutrition, but I'm talking about healthy animal fats from things like eggs and things like dairy and things like saturated fats from animals, these healthy fats that your dog or cat needs. And so basically your dog's or cat's nutrition is going to be like a pie chart. And so, for instance, I'll hear people say, I want a dog that's moderate or I want a dog food that's moderate in protein, low in fat, low in carbohydrates. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because you have to fill the pie chart up with something, right? There can't be air for the rest of the food. So for our research and what we've done and what we've formulated for the last 10 years, you're going to be, because cats and dogs, especially cats, but dogs as well, have such a hard time with carbohydrates or using them really for anything but fiber and some phytonutrients, just plant material in general, you're filling up the rest of that pie chart with protein and fat. And you want to fill it up with enough fat for them to use that as a source of energy, and protein to be able to rebuild without, taxing the kidney and being too high in protein. So that's kind of, it's basically protein and fat.
It's great. Yep. And we'll talk, because we touched on the carbohydrate issue, and that's something that we talk about all the time, is looking for a lower carbohydrate food so we can lower the glycemic index, the sugar index lower. And then what that will do is lower the inflammation in your overall body, in your organs, in your joints, like everything. You want to lower that, the inflammation. So can you just touch briefly on how we calculate carbohydrates? So the average person could go back tonight, they could look at their dog food or cat food bag and calculate carbohydrates.
Well, I mean, that's kind of
the simple math version, maybe. So
I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to. I mean, quite honestly, I would tell them that if they really want, if I'm giving them the easiest advice there, I would just tell them to, honestly, if you just Google it, there are tons of, because it depends if you're going from dry matter to as fed, right?
Right, I guess, right. No, you're right. Right.
So basically, you have to do it. So quite honestly, I would just make it easy on yourself. If you literally just Google, dry matter feeding calculator, it's everything that's not left when you have the fat and protein. So that's maybe not the answer you were looking for, but I just think it'll be easier than explaining it.
When you consider the wet mat, right? Exactly. But so what we want to do is try to reduce the carbohydrate load on our pets overall, and just be knowledgeable. And we can help you in the store with that too, and help you calculate that. So
and it's not an accident that you have to calculate it, right? Why isn't it on the bag? Because the larger producers, who are the people who actually make the laws at AFCO, your large companies don't want you to know that, because if you could see that, you'd be like, wait a minute, this whole bag's carbohydrates. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that we even have to do that in the first place.
Right. Some of the really good manufacturers are actually putting that on, at least online. You can look at the carbohydrates. Some are putting them on the bag as well now, finally. So as we're moving forward, so because people are demanding that. You touched on why moisture is so important with our pets, and I think just to stress that intracellular moisture. So my analogy is that you always feel more refreshed after you eat an orange than if you drink a glass of water, because that you get all the nutrients from the orange and you get all that intracellular moisture in your body, and that is more powerful than even just drinking a glass of water and having to absorb the water through your stomach. But and if you think about, the average animal is 70% moisture, like a mouse, for instance. For a cat, a mouse is 70% moisture. That's what our bodies really are needing, and so that's what we're trying to that's sort of the goal with when we're feeding, is to try to get moisture level
well, I mean,
there.
imagine if you took oranges and juiced them into a glass and drank it, or imagine if you dehydrated a bunch of oranges and then added water to them until they were hydrated again, and then juiced them and drank it. Do you think there'd be a difference in the nutrition there and the taste, quite frankly?
Right. Absolutely. So one of the things that we like to touch on as well is the benefit of whole fresh foods on the gut, because the gut is the source of the immune system for our bodies, the primary source of our immune system for our bodies, and gut health is so important. And how do fresh whole foods benefit our gut health?
Well, gut health is everything. I mean, we now know on the human side of things, that your gut health affects depression and ADD and a lot of these psychological disorders that we can actually have an effect on and change them just by the makeup of our microbiome. And I would say that the same thing is definitely true in looking at, obviously, dogs and cats as well. One of the things I always say is everyone understands this. I'm very, I have a lot of anxiety, so I have a stomach ache. Everyone understands that, but they don't understand my microbiome is actually communicating with my brain, and they don't understand this way moving up and saying, oh, maybe that can have an effect on even how I think. And so, that's the first thing that we look at when we're talking about animals with disease conditions, is how do we heal the gut? Here's a good example of that as well, just to show the impact of this. A group that does the microbiome testing was talking about how they identified a type of bacteria that actually is anti-inflammatory, so it promotes less inflammation in the body, and it's a bacteria that's found in your gut. Now, they found that animals who drink the regular dosage of our fermented fish stock, that makes up to about 30% of their total microbiome. And so not only are you gonna see this because of the fact that, oh, there's omega-3s in there and it's reducing the inflammation, but that goes right down to the bacteria as well. And so you're right to point out that the immune system is, heavily relying on the gut as well. So at Answers Pet Food, I mean, one of the things that our whole thing is fermentation. So we're talking about inoculating the gut with, thousands of different types of bacteria and soil microbes and all these different types of bacteria in order to, promote the better immune system, to promote less inflammation in the body, to promote better digestion of the food, to promote the creation of, vitamins even in the gut itself. So I would say all nutrition starts in the gut. And from there, you can kind of talk about other things. That's a reason, too, that when nature makes food, so for instance, we sell 2 types of fermented raw dairy. When nature makes food, one, going back to your moisture point, it puts it in a ton of moisture. Because when you want nutrients to be bioavailable, you put it in a ton of moisture. I think our goat's milk is 89% moisture. So, and number 2, you make sure that if you're setting up an animal's immune system, you have sufficient bacteria, but also sufficient bacteria setup. And what I mean by that is 1/3 of raw milk is not digestible by your dog or cat, but by the bacteria that are inherent in it to set up in the actual gut, right? So it's made to be more effective than if it were a supplement or something like that. And so I don't think in nutrition there's almost anything that's more important than the gut. And I think that's what we're seeing now. That's why, going back to what I was talking about earlier, that's why we're seeing all these health issues, is because you have, all of, and this is my own sort of like pet theory, but I think animals are removed from bacteria. So your dog or cat's microbiome is their environment and what they eat. So a lot of dogs and cats are not getting any sort of real bacteria. And if they're getting any sort of real bacteria, there's not very many species of it, right? If it's sprayed onto food or if it's from a supplement, you're not really getting a lot of species. And I think our cats and dogs are not only far removed from nature, so they're not getting those soil microbes, they're not getting bacteria from food, they're living in a completely sterile environment. Not completely sterile, but they're not really out experiencing, a lot of bacteria. So I think the problem lies in that aspect of animals. And then also, going back to your point, just the malnourishment of animals, because what is the greatest effect on the health of someone or their gene expression? It's what their mother ate when they were pregnant. So, imagine a malnourished dog giving birth to a malnourished dog that give birth to a malnourished dog, and now you have 10 generations of dogs that don't have the right genetic, tendencies to not, and I promise I'm almost done with this one, but, we all have seen that dog where it's like, oh, my dog's healthy, except for they're starting to limp and they get hot spots and they, get an ear infection every once in a while. These aren't normal things. And if we could sort of transition back into fresh food and foods that are actually raw and are the collective and not just the sum of their parts, are not just those individual nutrients, I think we could reverse it all. That's my soapbox. So.
Nope, that's great. That's perfect. That's what we want people to learn. And why we talk, why do we talk about that? That's part of our food, absolutely, our food literacy. And I think, I'll just show this, but we touched on already the transparency and sourcing and processing. Ask us, ask the manufacturers, go online to their websites, find out. As Billy said, if they're proud about it, you will know where that sourcing and processing came from, and you can ask for that information as well. But that's definitely something. Just in our own human food, we want to know where it comes from. We want to know how it's processed. We want to know the same thing for our pets as well. I think that we owe that to them. So let's talk a little bit about just touch briefly about pathogens and how we manage and control pathogens, because that's a concern when we're feeding fresh whole food, particularly raw foods that aren't cooked, or gently cooked, if you will. But that's one of the ways we control them. But just touch on pathogens in there. And that
sure.
Issue, so.
Well, pathogens are everywhere. They're in your stomach, they're in your kitchen, and they're ubiquitous. They're just part of our environment. So, it's kind of like, people are very scared of it. Well, I don't want to get salmonella. Well, you already have salmonella, right? You just, instead of it's kind of like, I don't know, a heavy topic right now would be viruses or something like that, right? Viruses are always going to be there. There's not something you're going to get rid of. So how then do we mitigate the risk of those pathogens? In our case, it's fermentation. And so obviously you don't want to be infected with a strain of E. coli, salmonella, or listeria that can grow. But the fear over raw food is really, it's more than it's made up to be. And what I mean by that is, so the law is different. So the quick version of this is the reason why you see companies recalling. And company recalls, by the way, are pretty much always voluntary. If anyone says like, well, this was a voluntary recall and we just did this because, we thought it was the right thing to do, I guarantee it was the FDA that told them that it was the right thing to do, in having dealt with the FDA. But it is still voluntary. And the reason why they do that is because the law is different. This is why we've been actually able to beat 2 recalls, which means that we have never had a recall. Because the law is, if you find salmonella in the food, you then have to do, you then have to investigate that. What type of salmonella was it? Did anybody get sick? Was there enough to make them sick? This is all relevant info, because there is, right, the CDC even says 30% of dogs and cats, or 30% of dogs shed salmonella in their stool, regardless of what they're fed. So we know that they're dealing with it just generally. So that is the law. Now, instead of law, so what happens is you sort of elect lawmakers and they make laws. That's how representative democracy works. But what they do in this case is the lawmakers put people in charge, and then those people say, well, we know the law, but we're going to make a policy. And their policy, which holds no actual weight, is not a law, is if they find one cell of salmonella, right? Doesn't matter what species it is. If we're going to find one cell of salmonella, we're going to consider that a class 1. I don't know if it's, I can't remember the term offhand, but we're going to consider that a recall that's as dangerous as it could kill someone. So a lot of these companies are being told to recall, well, their food isn't dangerous. And for a long time, we were the only people who actually stood up to this. But specifically with our food and pathogens, the really cool thing is we actually proved by doing a 77 sample, 16-week safety validation that our food is the safest food on the market. Not only did we test it for E. coli, salmonella, and listeria at 24 to 48 hours in the temperature in the refrigerator, at 7 days in the refrigerator, because that's the shelf life of the product, and at 24 and 48 hours at room temperature in case somebody mishandled it. So not only during that time did we find any listeria, coli, or salmonella, did any grow even when it was left out at room temperature, but statistically the food was the safest when left out at room temperature for 48 hours because it fermented that much more. The difference of 2 billion probiotics per ounce roughly on average when, for instance, when the food's in your refrigerator, to somewhere around 12 billion when it was left at room temperature for 48 hours. So with ours, I mean, I speak at vet schools to students, and I always say, like, what are the main problems vets have with raw food? Safety and nutrients. Well, we can prove the nutrients. We have feeding trial data as well. And look, we can prove to you that it's safe. We have data. So now what's the problem, I guess, in that case? So I know I'm not, on the team that makes any other raw foods, so I would have a hard time talking about those foods. But I know for us specifically, in terms of our fermentation method, that it works, and it works every time we do it. So.
Excellent. So this is a nice segue into our building bridges between the veterinarian community, because I know that you work with, you're part of the veterinarian team in that program that talks to veterinarians, and on your website, you list veterinarians who approve of your food or use your food or part of your, so that's a good, so I guess talk a little bit more about, because that's probably some of people's biggest, they want to start on a raw food diet or a fresh food diet, and then they talk to their veterinarian, and the veterinarian, for the reasons you mentioned, are maybe don't understand it all, or from either the pathogen or the nutrient side of it, question that.
Yeah, and well, it's really cool. So it's always funny to me when people say, like, "Oh, you're part of the veterinarian team." Well, I am the veterinarian team. There's no one else. But we have, somewhere around 45 vets who are actually in our program, so that have actually, signed up officially for the program. We have even more vets than that recommend and sell our food. We're just trying to, wrangle them all into one place. So we actually hired on Dr. Doug Knieven this year to be our staff veterinarian. And, it was a great move because he's really respected in both the conventional and holistic realm. And he's been working with my boss since even before Answers Pet Food. So he was definitely the first vet to have it, and probably one of the first stores just generally to actually, carry Answers Pet Food. So, we're doing a lot in order to form that partnership. One of the things that we just had last weekend actually was our first ever certified continuing education course in for veterinarians. Now, and I don't just mean like something like ANSWER certified. What I mean, it was actually RACE certified for continuing education that they need to keep their license, which was an incredible thing. And we had we had over 100 vets, and it was a 4-hour program. And Dr. Doug talked about just raw food in general, and how that relates to Answers Pet Food. And it was really cool because on the Q&A part, it was me and Dr. Doug that got to sort of do that. So the bridges are definitely being built there. And, I think a lot more people are open to it. And so you did mention we do have a locator on our website, so you can find veterinarians that either recommend or even sell Answers Pet Food. And the really cool thing too is that even when vets sell it, it actually benefits stores like yours, because veterinarians will sell it, but that doesn't mean they're going to the vet every time they buy food, right? And so we've actually seen a really great relationship between the veterinarians, in any given community, and also the stores like yours, which is, who we're trying to promote over time. So it is really cool to be a part of that program, and we expect to double the number we have now by the end of the year. And then we're going to kind of move into another phase where we actually get these vets into, an online forum with each other, talking about the results they get and why. And the other part of our vet program too is we offer training on our health guide, which actually is an 88-page health guide that has specific disease conditions for things like kidney disease, diabetes. There's a senior protocol in there. And one of the really just amazing things of my career so far has been to see vets actually using those as prescription diets, which I think is amazing, because it gives people a whole food option rather than, a processed food option if their animal's dealing with a health condition. So I really, we wanted to jump on it and take the lead on that this year, and I think it's going very well.
Excellent. So what is your overall, we're going to kind of now get into the almost 45 minutes into it, we're going to get in the nuts and bolts of this. But what's your best advice for pet parents? Just started one of my goals for tonight was saying, okay, what 3 things can pet parents do tomorrow to make a difference in their pets' health?
Well, I will tell you first, my dog decided to make an appearance, which normally I don't wake her up during these things because she would get mad at me, but she is here. So, and she is the best. So, right? She's like, okay, can I go back to my bed now? So Lua is, if anyone's ever seen my lives, Lua is, the reason for my career. But I always get all excited when I'm like, oh, you're paying attention to me. Wow, that's exciting stuff. She's very much like a cat. So, so 3 things I think that people can do is, the first thing is, it's not all or nothing. It doesn't have to be raw diet or processed diet. When it comes to us, I think every animal out there should be on one of our fermented raw dairy products, either our fermented raw cow milk kefir or our fermented raw goat milk, because milk is the most complete food on the planet. And also, there's so many people feeding processed diets. Pour it over the food, right? Let it soak in there, add some of that moisture back. There is no greater thing, I think, from a food perspective, that you could do in regards to doing that.
We got just on that note, we got a nice comment from Susan saying that she's using your straight beef and fermented goat milk, and it's helped her dog Rudy with a lot of digestive issues and things, and he's on that, and he's been doing really, really well. So it's been a really good fix for Rudy. So. Oh,
cool. Well, I mean, it makes sense. Going back to everything that we talked about, in regards to those 2 products, and those 2 products are really great for animals that you're trying to figure out, a limited ingredient diet, which is our straight formula, and then adding the fermented raw dairy to that. And so,
I'm sorry, I skipped your third point. So I jumped in there, but yeah.
Oh, no worries.
The first one was not all or nothing, and then adding some fermented raw dairy into no matter what you're feeding would be the second thing to do. And then
and I'm all about, and I'm all about, I think I could combine that into kind of, I guess, like 2.5, because, we offer a variety of ways to add things to all sorts of diets. It doesn't matter if you're doing canned or kibble or anything like that. Even if you look at like our fermented bone broths or something like that. So a good example of that would be if you're feeding a processed diet and you can do any of our like our bone broth every day, either our fermented raw or our fermented fish stock or our turkey stock with fermented beet juice and the milk, you're just going to increase the probability that you're going to be dealing with less health issues. And that's what we're all trying to do, right? I do have a third one for you. If you are feeding processed food, we talked about the first one, not all or nothing. We talked about the second one, adding in our fermented raw dairy. Share your food with your dog, if nothing else. Share healthy food with them. I'm not talking about the pizza crust necessarily, or something like that. But remember, there's no such thing as table food. There's no such thing as, people food. There's food, and every mammal needs it. And also, celebrate that relationship. Too many times people are like, oh, I don't want my dog to beg. Sharing food with your dog is like a privilege. It's like a gift. It's the bond that brought us together from the campfire to the wolf. And so share food with your dog and enjoy it, and really just get it. What's that?
I would say we do it every night when I make a salad and I'm prepping right here on the counter. I'm making a salad, and our Potter, our Chihuahua rat terrier mix, he goes right over. He's got his place. He's decided that that's where he sits. And then I chop up my vegetables and I give him a piece, and he gets a little bit of every bit of that salad. He loves salad and all the greens and things. So he gets all of that, and he absolutely loves it. And that is his treat that he gets. And so it works well. I mean, I would say from a training perspective, maybe feeding from the table can create bad habits, but you can create in place. You can put some things in their bowl. You could save it and then give it to them later. But absolutely, those whole fresh foods. That's another way.
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends on how you want to do it. I mean, I'm what most people would consider terrible. I mean, we eat on the couch and the dog is this close to us, like, hey, where's my food? But we're okay with that. But if you don't want to do that, you could just put it
there. It's what your house rules are. So Liz has said they rotate between the fermented goat milk and the fermented cow milk, the cow keeper, which is a nice.
So first of all, I'm a huge Liz fan. I just want to throw that out there. Liz is awesome. And
me too.
That is the number one thing to do, is to rotate between the two, because there's different fermentation, they're different species. And so, I'm happy to report, actually, we just got a new kefir milk farmer who is absolutely incredible here in Pennsylvania.
Great.
And so we're excited about that.
Good. So let's talk. People can. I just want to say, if you have questions or specific concerns or questions, let us know. You can just message us. We'll get those questions up for you. So start thinking of those. But I want Billy particularly. He's touched on a lot of ways that Answers pet food is different from other foods. But one of the things, and he's touched on this again, but there's two main points. Just talking a little bit more about the versatility of Answers food and all the different ways you can do it. You've got, I know on your YouTube channel, you have your Answers Academy, and you have a wonderful presentation on do-it-yourself diets, which is basically build your own diet, which is taking that limited ingredient diet, sort of that Rudy's eating, straight beef, whether it's fermented goat milk or maybe it's goat milk with duck eggs. But it's different ways you can build a diet that works for your animal. So I would recommend, if anybody is interested, go to that Answers Academy on YouTube, and there's a lot of videos there that are very, very helpful in kind of coming up with ideas. But talk just briefly about the feeding versatility of Answers. It's not, you have so many options and so many ways to get into it and approach it. So.
Yeah, so especially we just released our organic pastured duck eggs. So there's two ways to look at whole foods. There's our detailed formula, which is complete and balanced, right, by AFCO standards, which is a complete and balanced whole food, right? And that's made by people. So we formulate that to say, knowing what we know about science, here's the best possible thing that an animal could eat, and it has as much as we can know in it, right? But nature is also very good at making complete foods, right? It makes complete foods for babies or for developing chickens, all that, or ducks in this case. And so what I love about our food offerings is if your dog's diet is a pie chart, right? You could take our detailed formula, you could take milk, and you could take one of those eggs, and you could take those eggs, and you can make up as much of their diet as you want to in any one of those foods. So here's a good example of that. Let's say your dog needs 4 ounces of Answers detailed food per day, okay? You could do 4 ounces of detailed food, or 3 ounces of our goat milk is calorically the same as our food, roughly, right? So you could do 4 ounces of detailed food, or you could do 3 ounces of detailed food and 3 ounces of milk. And those are all complete foods. Or you could do 2 ounces of food and 6 ounces of milk. Or you could do 9 ounces of milk and 3 ounces of food. And even there, you can vary between those things. And the same thing with the egg. The egg is 110 calories, and you want to feed the shell with it as well. So when you're doing those types of things, that's the really cool thing for me is you could have 3 products there and have really endless, variety there. And I would recommend they check out the class on our YouTube channel, and shameless plug, subscribe as well.
Well, absolutely. Right. No, absolutely. We have a question from Stephanie who says, my 12-year-old Wime gets 20 ounces a day of detailed beef or chicken, plus 4 ounces of Bones & Co., another raw brand, to help keep weight on her. She has a large tumor on her chest, by the way. I used to rotate cow kefir and goat milk, but she was losing weight. Any ideas?
Well, I don't think she was losing weight because of the milk. If I will say that the fermented raw cow milk kefir is better for keeping weight on than the goat milk, and that's just because of that beautiful Jersey cow milk that's up to 5% fat. We've seen really good results even in like breeds like German Shepherds that have a hard time in certain cases keeping weight on. If you have a tumor and you're dealing with that, it looks like you're in that ketogenic range anyway based on what you're doing there. But if you do want to reach out to us at info@answerspetfood.com, we could actually send you a PDF of our cancer ketogenic diet. And the nice thing about all our health protocols is each one has a worksheet on it. And as long as you start at step 1 and move to the bottom, it will tell you exactly how much to feed daily of any amount. But right now you're doing awesome in terms of keeping those carbohydrates low, keeping the fat where it needs to be. So I don't think you have to change anything, but you could go to the formulated ketogenic diet if you wanted to.
Okay. So info@answerspetfood.com is where they could. Okay. So any specific questions like that? Excellent. Thank you. So I guess it was sort of touching on that, but the benefit of treating disease with whole fresh foods and how you can approach it. You touched on it when we talked about the veterinarian community. Is that health guide something that only is available to veterinarians, or can consumers have access to that, or how does that work? Or how would they, if they have a specific health concern, how would they?
Oh yeah, I mean it's available for everyone. In fact, if you email that email address right there, info@answerspetfood.com, we can send you the PDF for it. And the problem is we can't put it on our website because the FDA doesn't love healing with food. So so you do have to email us for it. We get that a lot. Like, why don't you just put it on your website? Well, unfortunately, we can't legally. But
I can tell you, it's very, very complete. It's very thorough. It's amazing, the information that's there, and something you could go to a nutritionist, go to a vet with, and say, hey, this is an option of healing with whole fresh foods. So, and
you have to start there. There is no healing unless you get the diet right. Really. And we have animals that the cool thing is a lot of people think immunocompromised animals can't be on raw food. That is definitely not the true in our case, especially with the fermentation. I mean, we have animals going through chemo. We have all different types of health conditions. But these are diets that work. I mean, they really work. That's the cool thing is they were all developed by doing case studies. So we have countless, every day we have people emailing us saying, hey, I've been doing your kidney protocol for 6 months, and guess what? My animal had kidney disease. His numbers are back in normal range. I mean, that's incredible. That's with no medication. That's an absolutely incredible feat. And so the cool thing about it is if anyone's watching this and wants to try it, there's no drawbacks to it. It's not medicine. It's just food. So there is no like side effects. You're not going to get, it's not like the problem with medicine is it works to do certain things, but that stops the homeostasis of other parts of the body. Right. And so like when we're working with people, it's important to know one thing. If your animal has health issues, are you looking for a patchwork to ease the symptoms, or are you looking to actually fix the problem? Because we can help with both of those things. But if you're fixing the problem, it's going to take a little bit longer, and you're going to go through some things. And so I would urge people that if they are dealing with a particular health issue, why not try a new diet? Why not try some of these protocols? And guess what? If it fixes it, which it probably will, because that's how we develop them, then cool. You just got to fix your animal, and you don't have to use any daily medications. I think that's just it's a win-win situation, I think.
Right. Excellent. Question. This is someone I talked with today, has a dog who she's had dogs her whole life, and this is her first dog, Cairn Terrier, who does not like raw food.
Okay.
In general.
So
what are some techniques that she might use? Because she's going to watch this after the fact. And so what would be some food, like what might be some things you would suggest for her?
Well, and this is how old? So the dog doesn't have any health issues. Same.
No.
Okay. Well, the first one I would say is my favorite one, which is the tough love method. So remember, if your dog doesn't have any health issues, they can miss a meal. They can miss 2 meals. They could even miss 3 meals. I think we kind of get obsessed with feeding our dog, and one of my favorite stories with that is the guy whose dog that was interviewed, whose dog lived to be like 31 or whatever in Australia. The dog was raised on a dairy farm, would drink raw milk every day, and I just was so refreshed by the farmer. And he said, every day this dog would come in when we were milking and get her bowl of milk for breakfast. And if she didn't come in, I assumed she wasn't hungry and she didn't get fed that day. And it's like, he didn't worry about it because if she did miss a meal, it's totally fine. So I would actually, the number one thing I recommend people do, put the food down for 20 minutes. If your dog doesn't want it, pick it up, put it back in the fridge, doesn't get his breakfast, put it back down for dinner, they usually figure out very quickly that when the food's down, I have to eat the food. And then they end up liking it, actually. It just takes time because a lot of times it's a texture thing or whatever it might be. But I understand there's some people who just simply can't do that. I have a pug, so as you saw, so she'll literally eat anything at any time. I don't have to deal with that.
She will eat a combination of a dehydrated, it's a combination of like a dehydrated freeze-dried food that she will eat. So she's getting close to raw, but not,
sure.
Maybe it's a moisture thing or.
The other thing too is if you can get the dog to like any of our additional products too, if some animals really like milk and you could cover it in milk, or, I'd recommend hydrating the freeze-dried food and then just adding small amounts of our product to it, like really small amounts, like a teaspoon, let's say, and then just working up. Any of those will work, I think.
Perfect. Okay. Excellent. We have another good question from Carly. What is the number one thing you recommend with a dog that has yeast issues in both the ears and skin? Yeast is a real conundrum for a lot of dogs. She's been fed raw for the past 5 years. I rotate between Answers and other commercial raw brands.
So I did a class on this once, and yeast is very interesting because a lot of times, even when animals go on raw diets and reduce carbohydrates, there's still a yeast issue, which doesn't really make any sense except for the fact that yeast is really virulent. So number one thing I'd recommend you do is go on our yeast protocol, which is I'm super proud of it. Basically, the concept that we're doing something I think that is a little bit different than anyone when it comes to yeast, and that is we're inoculating your dog with a bunch of good yeast. Remember, yeast is going to be there. You want to take something as virulent, which is that good yeast, and the main source of good yeast here is our kefir. So our yeast protocol is actually, I believe offhand, the recommended amount of either one of our stocks is the recommended amount of goat milk, because caprylic acid in goat's milk and some of the other medium chain fatty acids are going to kill some of those bad yeast species. And then the rest of the calories are 50% our straight formula, which is no carbohydrates, and then 50% of the calories coming from our fermented raw cow milk kefir, which has at least 1 billion good yeast per ounce. So you're inoculating that system with all that good yeast and bacteria. Now, keep in mind that bad yeast is going to have to die. So that's one you're probably going to go through some detox, but just keep going and you'll come out on the other side much, much better. But the yeast protocol works. And if that's too much for you, I would just highly recommend using our kefir, at least the recommended daily, but probably doubling it, and using it consistently every day, forever. And you should see at least a reduction there.
Right. The tricky part is that yeast die off because you don't want that to be so sudden that it can cause issues.
Yeah.
When the bad yeast dies, so you want to do it as slowly as possible. But that's great. Okay, I think we're about an hour into this. So if anyone has any questions yet, we'll wait just a little, couple minutes for any more questions. Otherwise, Billy, I really want to thank you for being with us tonight. I think everyone learned a lot tonight and got some more information, and the whole goal was, for all of these talks that we're having with our Destination Raw or Fresh Food events is, what are our takeaways that people can start doing today to make a difference in their pet's health. And like you said, I think just being just more aware of what your pet is eating is one big thing, and being intentional about what they're eating. Making their own food or preparing their food can be a show of love and a gift of love for your animals, and all of that shows. So I think that those are things we can do. And you're right, it's not all or nothing. I think adding a little bit of fermented goat milk, cow milk, the fish stock, the broth, adding moisture into your food, adding all that good bacteria does a lot for our animals' overall health. And then, as you said, just share your food, share the good foods you have. Don't be afraid of that. We've been programmed for a lot. Don't rotate your food. Don't share your table scraps. Like all of these things, we have to throw that out and say, okay, what really makes sense? If I'm eating this, why can't my pet eat this in moderation as well? We give them a good foundation. And I think if we can do that, we're taking those first steps in control of our pet's health. And remember, let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. So I think that's great. And so Stephanie says, thank you so much. You're very welcome, Stephanie, and thank you, Billy. Loves answers, and that's terrific. And so we're really pleased. We're very excited to carry answers. Very pleased. Those duck eggs are amazing. Just FYI, they come frozen, but they break up really beautifully with the fork. There's so much. It's just a whole perfect little bit of protein in that egg, and they're huge and really amazing. So that's a brand new product that just came in to the stores, and so we're really excited. And there are some other new exciting products on the way as well that Billy and the team are creating. So the power of food continues. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to listen to this tonight. It means that you care, and it means that you love your pets and you love what they're eating. And we all want them to thrive and not just survive. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you, Billy. And
no problem.
We will see you all later.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.